So let's talk through 9 army lists that perhaps have the claim to fame for being the very best lists in Warhammer 40k right now. Every single one of them having won enormous tournaments of over 100 players. What are the best generals around using to get success on the tabletop? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're looking at some of the absolute pinnacle of strong armies in Warhammer 40k and seeing what can do well in the absolute most challenging conditions possible. Taking a look at the list that do well in tournaments tends to do a good job of highlighting what's strong and what's not. All theory crafting aside, this is what people have actually managed to do well with, usually just winning a standard grand tournament, say 5 rounds, and something like 30 to 50 players certainly shows that a list has done well, having to beat a good number of opponents and basically guaranteeing that you're going to be fighting against multiple armies and generals that have been well constructed and generally know what they're doing. For this one though, I thought we'd take a look back at the army lists that have maybe done the next level above that, outright winning events that are greater than 100 people in size and have had at least 6 rounds in them as well. Basically an extra level of difficulty, essentially meaning that you have to beat another player who's essentially a tournament winner in another event, and potentially for the bigger ones far more than that. With that in mind, I thought we'd take a look at the armies of the 9 players that have achieved that, which factions made it to the top and what units were in the army lists, and talk a little bit about why they might be so strong right now. Starting out with a tournament where there must be absolutely terrifying competition. First up we have a Death Guard list run by an Alban de Polignac, who used Death Guards to take first at the WTC War Master Grand Tournament. So this is the one that's associated with the team tournament. It means that players might be running unusual lists, but at the same time the competition must be absolutely next level. The majority of people attending really know what they're doing and take their model soldiers very seriously. Maybe not too much of a surprise to see Death Guard at the top of this one. They've certainly done well at loads of events recently and they're not the only entry on this list. It does look like it's a fairly well balanced and terrifying version of the Virulent Vectorium, all the scary Death Guard staples in a good ratio. The detachment is Virulent Vectorium, so basically their updated plague company. It has sticky objectives, some good enhancements, and a bunch of fairly useful and general purpose stratagems, things like -1 damage, 1 CP for some big rerolls with infantry at range, and potentially auto-exploding vehicles. In the HQ section, there's a Demon Prince of Nurgle with Revolting Regeneration, a huge amount of stats to chew through there. Revolting Regeneration gives him the 5+ Feel No Pain, so very tanky to take down. There's one of the absolutely murderous Plague Marine units, a unit of 10 of them with a bunch of plasma guns, blight launchers, and melee things. And they've got a Biologist Putrefier and a Malignant Plague Caster attached. When taken together, they have the absolutely enormous combo of sustained and lethal hits on a 5+ at range and melee. If that unit gets a full activation off jumping out of its Rhino for an extra damage buff, there's very little in the game that will be able to tank their damage. Then there's 2 deep striking Death Shroud Terminator units, able to turn up just outside of 6 inches, provided you've got contagion range on the enemy unit that they're trying to threaten. The Death Shroud have got some nice general purpose stat lines, and then the Lord of Contagion takes them to the next level with his buffs, and one of them takes the Furnace of Plagues for some extra fight factor. Then there's a whole bunch of really efficient light demon engine support, 3 bloat drones with the heavy blight launchers, near enough auto-include in Death Guard lists when they're just 100 points, or that strength 10 shooting at effectively AP -3 and -1 toughness is massive. They're backed up by a pair of Mephitic Blight Haulers for some slightly closer range anti-tank, and there's a Flesh Mower bloat drone which could be a bit more of a skirmishing trading piece and push out contagions perhaps. Then finally for objective support, there's 3 units of 10 Poxwalkers, so lots of screening in the mid-board if desired, or just cheap bodies to stand on objectives. Again, can be good for getting contagions where they need to be, and 1 lone tallyman who I'm guessing will just be sitting and farming command points on a home objective, giving you more stratagems to plug into those dangerous units. Finally, there's also 1 Lord of Virulence as well, who could give the Blight Launcher drones some big rerolls, and still has a fairly tough character profile too. Overall, looks like an enormous amount of strength and looks really quite typical for Death Guard at the moment. Maybe the Flesh Mower drone perhaps being one of the slightly more unusual things here. It's not bad, but maybe not in every list. There's not really much else that's unexpected. Certainly feels like Death Guard are going to be first in line for nerfs at the next update, though definitely doesn't diminish the achievement of taking down such an enormous event with them. Next up, we've got some more Deity Legion chaos with the Emperor's Children list used by John Leonard of Art of War to take first at the Edmonton Open, going 8-0 at another tournament of around 250 players. Emperor's Children were doing great pre-data slates, though do seem to have dropped off a fair bit given the direct nerfs to some of their strongest stuff. Not standout weak, but they haven't had a lot of tournament victories. The detachment used for them here is the Coterie of the Conceited one. That's the one where you make pledges as to how many units you can kill. It's fairly easy to unlock reroll hit rolls of 1, then potentially reroll to wounds of 1 later in the game, and maybe some absolutely devastating melee buffs if you get towards the later end of the table. It's got a few useful stratagems for all rerolls to hit in the fight phase, maybe if you didn't have the rerolls active yet. An Armor of Contempt equivalence, the ability to increase your pledge if you kill more than your target, and some melee manipulation forcing the opponent to attack one thing. The Emperor's Children are able to get up the board and rush fast if they want to, and there's loads of things that could zoom forward to make alpha strikes if it made sense. There's 2 units of Infractors alongside a Lord Exalt on each. There are enormous melee threats between the Lord's sheer amount of attacks, the Infractor's wound rerolls, and the Lord giving everything lethal hits and its boosted melee rounds. I guess they might be doing some scouting in the Rhinos and then having the Noise Marines trade places for them. That could mean that the Rhinos move further forward, and then you have some Blastmasters to fire out the top of them, and potentially quite good options for what they could get line of sight on early in the game. Speaking of which, there's 3 units of Noise Marines with Blastmasters, lots of sonic shots with Ignores cover, and the Blastmasters to handle some tougher stuff with Strength 10 damage 3. There's a Lord Cacophonist which could amp up the damage of one squad if he wasn't running solo as a utility unit, which I have seen some people do. Then there's a bunch of big chunky melee threats, 2 Winged Demon Princes with their big mortal wound impact hits on the charge. They're fairly hard to kill with their datasheet rule, and one of them has Unholy Fortitude to stand back up when he dies. And alongside them there's 2 Mauler Fiends as well, again very fast moving and quite good anti-tank damage, maybe not the worst for enemy monsters or knights. Then there's Lucius the Eternal in a very fighty lone operative who's got great value between his utility and his damage output, and then 2 units of Tormentors allowing you infiltrate for the army and could potentially mark the home objective with sticky objectives as well. Pretty much auto-includes to have some of those. Certainly still shows that the Emperor's Children can be very scary indeed. Though I guess this was before Knights got their big updates, I can't help but think they might have a bit of trouble with those. Quite a few of their units feel like they'd be punching up to take down big toughness 11 profiles with too many wounds. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to Titans Terrain, the video sponsor. If you're looking to get some Warhammer 40k terrain on the table, they're one option that does things a bit differently to others out there. And they basically have a system of folding cardboard tiles for a pop-up battlefield. The area of the battlefield is made up of a 3x4 tile grid. Each of those folds in half, and when you unfold it, up pops a building. So you basically have a Warhammer 40k terrain set that you can store completely flat, and it all fits inside a box set the same size as, say, a standard board game. I would say it has its pros and cons versus other terrain sets out there. It's cheaper than Games Workshop terrain. That means that no extra hobby effort is needed to put terrain on the board, though I'd say the biggest unique selling point is its storage and transportability. If you've got limited space at home, or you need to transport terrain around to go to a friend's house or something. I'll talk a little bit more about the pros and cons and some of their specific sets at the end of the video if you'd like to take a look at that, but otherwise there'll be links down in the video description below, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. Next up from Slaanesh to perhaps their most bitter foe, we've got the Aeldari, generally tending to play War Host or Aspect Host a lot more since Inari got nerfed, and now quite a lot more mid-tier in terms of army stats and performance at tournaments. Certainly hasn't stopped them winning an event at the highest level here, with this list by Brad Chester taking first at the Salt City GT, going 7 games undefeated at a tournament of just over 100 players. The army's using War Host, which is the one that basically doubles down on the Battle Focus core rule. You get an extra token and get a +1 movement to your agile maneuvers, both of which can be handy enough, and it feels like it's maybe taken over a bit as the sort of movement shenanigan detachment after the Inari Lethal Intent got nerfed. Otherwise it gets some standard Aeldari movement related tricks in the stratagem section. Fallback, shoot and charge, being -1 to hit with lightning fast reactions, retreating into a transport with Skyborn Sanctuary, fire and phase to pop up and then hide again, a return to reserve, and a damage buff with blitzing firepower. Really quite a lot of valuable stuff here and not too hard to spend some command points. Strong Eldar lists tend to be going very heavy on the Aspect Warriors and Phoenix Lords these days. Maybe starting with the biggest and punchiest looking combos. There's a unit of 10 Dark Reapers with a missile launcher on the Exarch. It looks like they run with an Autarch with a Reaper launcher. I'd guess they might be the ones that might be firing and fading in and out of a Wave Serpent, the Autarch being able to use Skyborn Sanctuary for free. Really quite nasty punchy firepower that you can't do much about. The other option, or maybe even trying to get value out of the Wave Serpent at the same time with the jumping in and out, are an enormous unit of 10 Fire Dragons led by Fugan. He can give them an extra 6-inch range, and certainly in a world of Knights, that's a unit that's well capable of just doing ridiculously enormous damage if they can get within close range of their targets. Battle focus and boosted movement can be a very good way for them to get there, even if they're a long way back behind terrain. Backing up those, there's also a smaller unit of Dark Reapers with a Tempest launcher, and a smaller unit of Fire Dragons with a Fire Pike. And for the more aggressive Aspect Warriors, there's 2 units of Swooping Hawks, very long charge ranges and good against infantry. One has Jane Zar in the unit for a whole bunch more threat, and then a couple of squads of Warp Spiders as well, one maybe being a little bit more skirmishing and objective focused, taking the Spinnerets and the Weavers, and the other one being a melee-focused murder unit with Phoenix Lord Lycus, the Exarch taking the Power Blade array, and then that unit can basically jump 24 inches and still charge. So it absolutely guarantees to get a charge on exactly what they want to. They can even do some interesting debuffs on the enemy units as they move in. Finally for the characters, there's also another Autarch as well. I guess they might leave the other Howling Banshee unit. Then finally there's a whole bunch of objective support style things, 2 units of swooping hawks, the X aren't taking a las blaster, they can shred some light infantry and jump around the board doing secondaries, 1 unit of rangers for some cheap infiltrates, and then 2 units of Corsair Void Reavers with blasters, some nice cheap and expendable units that can jump onto the mid board and take objectives, and be a fair bit more sacrificial compared with the rest of the Aeldari. As per usual with Eldar at the moment, it feels like a list that would be very player skill dependent, lots of units that are really fragile if they're exposed, units with enormous damage punches but ones that really need to count, and massive amounts of movement options that you're not going to be able to make use of all of them, so you need to know where they're going to have the most impact. It is cool to see the Aspect Warriors at the forefront of the Aeldari army though. Next up, we've got a Space Marines list, and Ultramarines took down the lead Super Major with this Stormlance Task Force list by Josh Roberts. Space Marines in general really don't seem to have been having too good of a time of it on the tournament stats recently. Win rates are around about 43 to 44% or so. As usual, people still play them a good amount, though very few people have actually been seeing some top tournament success, at least relative to the numbers of those playing. It's not really too surprising to see the list be Ultramarines. It does feel like for more competitive Space Marine lists, it's been them and then the rest. I don't really feel like the balance updates really changed that to too big an extent. It did mean that Rabute, Gilliman and Marneus Calgar aren't quite as strong when in the same army list, though as you can see here it certainly seems that they're viable. Both of them still bring loads of value to the army for their points though. Gladius Task Force is the most played for the Space Marines at the moment. I feel like Stormlance Task Force quite commonly sees success at the high levels of play even if not many people use it. It does feel a bit of an unusual detachment with so many of the options being restricted to mounted units, though again you often see lists doing well that have none. Having army-wide advance and charge and fallback and charge is good for melee units. They've got an advance and shoot stratagem, though maybe the other really big value one is win swift evasion, 1 command point for full 6 inches, unrestricted reactive move. That can be some pretty immense value for infantry managing to stay safe and then make another counter attack after the enemy turn. In any case, going through the units, there's Rabute Gilliman. He'll enjoy the advance and charge and can hand out a free stratagem to new units nearby. He also marks 2 targets for Oath and Moment, so you can move on to the second once you've destroyed the first. And then he's joined by 2 other Ultramarines characters on top of that. Marneus Calgar with a set of 4 company heroes as a big tough brawler unit. Kind of interesting that it was worth to take him even if he doesn't generate his command points though. And then Uriel Ventris, who can debuff some command points nearby, and also gives you deep strike on a unit. I guess maybe he's deep striking the Eradicators to get them in range, so they can just be a nice efficient anti-tank punch coming in from reserve. And I guess if so, that's to have him joining the Stern Guard veterans, who with their rerolls can make him a pretty monstrous threat against an Oath of Moment target. They'll be able to fully reroll to hit, fully reroll to wound, and be +1 to wound as well. And that means between their shooting and melee, they can take out a whole bunch of targets in 40k. Perhaps the most interesting thing in the army list is a Storm Raven gunship, which I feel like crops up in these Stormlance lists every so often. It's very niche outside of it, but it's a big 280 point flyer that can do a good alpha strike, and it gets a lot more viable here as you have a 1 command point stratagem to make it -1 to hit and wound when shooting at it, and that can tip the balance between it being shot down immediately or taking a bit more effort to do so. In this one it could zoom up the board and maybe deliver an alpha strike of Ballistas Dreadnoughts and maybe Stern Guard veterans if it made sense to. Again, I'm not 100% sure exactly what's being transported here. It does look like an unusual army list with a lot of options. To back it up on the firepower though, there's 2 Ballistas Dreadnoughts, which are hard to go too far wrong with in Space Marines, sturdy gun turrets that get 4 rerolls to hit, so don't really need Oath of Moment quite so badly. And then again, unusually there's not 1 but 3 Storm Speeder Hammer Strikes, the ones with the 3-shot multi-melters and being able to strip cover from units. Really quite a lot of close range firepower. You should be able to get ignored cover on most of the shooting, and they could also potentially be targets for the -1 to hit and wound stratagem if they wanted to be. Finally, for some utility and objectives, there's a scout squad and a lieutenant with a combi weapon. Overall, really quite an interesting list with a whole bunch of options there. 3 very punchy melee threats with Gilliman, the Stern Guard and Uriel, and Marneus Calgar and the company heroes. And a lot of pretty massive firepower to back them up. The Storm Ravens, massive investments, but also will pretty much guarantee an alpha strike. Definitely looks like the sort of unusual list that's more of a testament to player skill than something that's going to be easy to win games with. I'm sure if the vast majority of people picked up this one, they'd probably find it harder to win with than maybe more typical Gladius lists with the Ultramarines. Really fun to see some less common stuff do so well though. Next up, and talking of high skill armies once again, we've got the Genestealer Cults, an army of the 4-armed Emperor taking first at Palm Springs Open. A big almost 150 player tournament with Carlos Kaiser going 6-0 there. Genestealer Cult have been doing rather well in the tournament stats, not a very widely played army but having some really good success at the moment. The detachment used here is the Host of Ascension, basically the balanced sort of reserve shenanigans style one, giving you some really nice damage buffs when your units arrive on the board, plenty of options for character enhancements to hit even harder, and some other sneaky tricks beyond that, such as phasing things back to reserves once they've been shot. These Host of Ascension lists often tend to go very heavy on the big blocks of 20 neophytes, with a huge amount of special weapons, profiles that aren't particularly threatening if they're not buffed, but in this detachment you can stack them really high. Full rerolls to hit from the Primus, sustained hits from the detachment rule, and a couple of powerful stratagems to hit harder, such as the sustained hits on 5. It looks like there's 2 Primuses leading 2 blocks of 20 of those, both with great damage enhancements, one with lethal hits added into the mix, and one with Assassination Edicts for +1 to hit character units. There's also another squad of neophytes which could be used for sticky objectives on the home field perhaps. Then there's a scary block of melee with a unit of metamorphs. It seems they're being delivered to the fights by the biophages that can give them some lethal hits, and he takes the enhancement Our Time Is Nigh to allow them very reliable deep strike and charge with a +2 to the charge roll. Then for other fairly main damage threats, there's 2 units of 2 Achilles Ridge Runners. They take heavy mining lasers for some fairly fearsome anti-tank, and just have a lot of all-around good value, being fairly fast with scouts, some alright anti-tank damage, and can still mark other units for their big debuff with extra AP with their stubber. And there's also another Ridge Runner to help out with that as well, with a mortar who can sit safe and just mark stuff. Then for the rest of the list, there's a huge amount of units to skirmish and do secondary objectives and things. No less than 4 units of Acolytes with Hand Flamers. They all just take the Hand Flamers this time, so really focusing on taking out the lighter infantry and things that they can shoot out of deep strike. They get some rerolls against things on objectives for some extra power. There's one with the auto pistol and mining weapons that could be used to farm some command points. 2 Reductor Saboteurs with some nice value between lone operative utility and some big damage if the enemy dares to get too close. A squad of these slightly cheaper and scouting Atalan Jackals with an Incinerator, and 1 unit of infiltrating Pure Strain Genestealers. Both of those can be recycled really quite cheaply and efficiently just for 2 Resurgent points now. And finally a pair of Goliath trucks. If I had to guess, maybe the Handflamer Acolytes going in there, though I suppose they could be an option for delivering the Metamorphs. Overall looks like a tough army list to fight though. 3 pretty enormous damage punches, a bit of anti-tank range support, and then a vast amount of small interference units for scoring high on secondary objectives and blocking and frustrating the enemy, a whole bunch of them respawning as well with resurgence things. As ever though, Genestealer Cult not one of the easiest armies to command in Warhammer 40k. Next up, we've got the Tau Empire. They got some big boosts in the last update from a vastly improved faction rule, though given that they were struggling quite a bit before, they still seem to be sort of low mid-ish in the tournament performance stats and win rates at the moment. A few tournament victories, but not many, though people seem to be struggling to win with them more at a casual level. One person who managed to win a grand tournament, and a big one at that though, was this one by Durant Genestealer Bazzini, who used it to take first at Mountain West Classic GT, winning 6 games to no losses. Tau detachments generally all have quite a good following, and some people having success with most of them. It looks like Montcar and Cao Yon are doing better than the rest though. This one's using Cao Yon, getting the sustained hits later in the game, though it did get a nerf as a detachment when they redid the army rule, dropping down from sustained hits 2 to sustained 1 with ignores modifiers. Otherwise for the Patient Hunter detachment, there's some damage buffs, one with a +1 to wound and extra AP for a focused target, redeploying ghost kills and stealth suits if it makes sense, and a re-embark for some breachers if they happen to have survived outside of a devilfish, which can potentially protect them from a charge. This list goes pretty heavy on the town mainline damage dealers and defensive units. 3 Riptides with ion accelerators can put out some general purpose firepower and aren't too adverse to being on the front lines with good defensive profiles and fall back and shoot. There's just the 1 ghost kill, often people use a bit more in Cao Yon. They're near guaranteed to survive into the late game when the damage buffs come online, and they do have that stratagem. There's 2 Sky Rays and a Hammerhead for some big hitting anti-tank firepower. Certainly not the worst with a whole bunch of knights out there in the meta. A Devilfish with 10 Breachers for some seriously punchy firepower into the midboard, and a unit of Pathfinders as some fairly efficient and dangerous infiltrators with their recon drone allowing them to deploy on the front lines, and some ion rifles that could punish medium infantry. There's 2 units of stealth suits to mark those targets, no longer needing quite so many of them to mark them for the entire army's firepower potentially if you've got lots of line of sight on something that's an important target. Commander Shadow Sun for an aura of reroll 1s to hit, an aura of command point refunds, and just some good lone operative utility on top of that, with a couple of fusion blasters, and then lots of utility things beyond that. 2 Crutox Riders for a chunky unit of scouts, 1 squad of Vespid Stingwings to bounce on and off the board doing secondaries, a unit of Kroot Carnivores that can mark the home objective for sticky objective and have OC2, and then a couple of Piranhas that can scout forward really quite quickly, potentially making themselves a roadblock to stop the enemy moving up the board so fast. Could be handy against knights maybe. In any case, good to see an army of the greater good doing well. It looks like a well-balanced list between a bunch of damage and lots of utility things for scoring high. Next up, we've got some Sons of Sanguinius. The Blood Angels had some pretty enormous points drops in the last update, but despite initial hype, it sort of boosted them to more mid to upper mid tier. Most people using the Liberator Assault group for the big punchy damage buffs as this one, though some enjoying Angelic Inheritors as well. For their single biggest tournament win, this list by Christopher Radford placed first at the Kent Major, a big 100-player grand tournament, and went 6-0 undefeated. I feel like as Blood Angels army list goes, this one's a bit different to the standards, going a fair bit heavier on the Death Company than most. Liberator Assault Group is a fairly scary detachment, +2 to strength and +1 attack on the charge, and then stratagems for advance and charge and masses more damage, plus a fair bit else. It's pretty cool to see some heavy use of the Jump Death Company here. There's 2 sets of 5 that look like they're being led by the Death Company captains with Power Fist and Handflamer, one of them taking the speed of the Primarch enhancement, I believe that one for Fight First, and then a big 10-man squad with Lamartis who can give them lethal hits and helps out their durability by quite a bit as well. Nice to see the Death Company captains being used. Previously there wasn't so much draw to them when you needed chaplains to give them some OC. Otherwise, for another enormous damage punch, there's Commander Dante leading one big squad of 6 Sanguinary Guards, well capable of tangling with the toughest stuff around there. There's 2 fast-moving skirmishing units of Jump Intercessors, nice enough for their secondary objectives, and can obliterate some lighter infantry with mass strength 6 attacks. And another seriously punchy melee combo with a Blood Angels captain with Rage Fueled Warrior, joining a squad of Sternguard veterans here, and then I'm sure his goal will be to target something with the Oath of Moment, and then he'll be able to enjoy 4 rerolls to hit, 4 rerolls to wound, and also his sustained hits 3 all on the same turn, while also giving himself devastating wounds and an extra 3 attacks as well. Pretty brutal stuff that when they charge something out of their impulsor they should be able to destroy it. Then we've got Fighty Lone Operative with Fights First that is Mephiston, a Combi Weapon Lieutenant for some utility and objective shenanigans, a squad of 3 cheap Blade Guard, which looked like a nice sort of skirmishing and trading kind of unit, enough damage to make their presence felt and not super high investment, and then 5 Intercessors for sticky objectives and some scouts to screen out the midboard with their Infiltrate. With combat knives they can be a pretty good melee threat in their own right as well. Overall, lots of nasty jump infantry threats there. It's cool to see the Death Company do quite so well. They did get a fair few buffs last time around. I feel like a lot of people were apprehensive whether or not they'd really done enough for them to make them good. Finally, for our last 2 army lists, we've got another couple of Death Guard lists. It's perhaps not too surprising that Death Guard have taken not 1 but 3 different tournaments at this kind of level. Maybe getting their event wins a little bit more reliably than the also very powerful Knights. They are still winning plenty though, and I feel like there is a fair bit of random factor as to which armies specifically take down these super major style things. It is a very low sample size. I'll go through the Death Guard at least fairly quickly, given that we've already talked about one list of them. This list by Stephen Trimble was used to take first at Games Workshop's Tacoma Open, the biggest event out of any of these listed today at 455 players, and this one uses Mortarian's Hammer, the one that supports demon engines with a whole bunch of stratagem support, and also has a very powerful detachment rule that allows you to mark units for contagions a long way away, or very helpful for amping up demon firepower, but maybe surprisingly good in combo with the Death Shroud Terminators, which basically means that you can mark units to be afflicted and then deep strike right next to them for a charge. As a result, it looks like there's 3 units of Death Shroud here, maybe more than the standard 2 that a lot of armies take, 2 of them led by the Lord of Contagion. I guess maybe the Lord of Virulence might be hanging around elsewhere and buffing the firepower. Then there's 3 units of Poxwalkers to take the midboard and screen out things, and then this list unsurprisingly goes very heavy on the demon engines, the fairly standard 3 Feet Bloat drones with the heavy blight launchers for enormous damage, 2 Mephitic blight haulers for some anti-tank and anti-heavy infantry. The biggest difference for this one is 3 Plague Burst crawlers, so a very meaningful amount of indirect fire there, particularly when amped up with contagions, and they also have some scary entropy cannons with strength 10 and a bunch of damage. There's definitely some sacrifices being made in supporting units for the 3 Plague Burst crawlers there, paying a massive premium to have them in, but I can see how it would be pretty disturbing to a lot of armies out there at the moment to have a whole bunch of indirect fire. Most armies just aren't really too prepared for it. It's going to be very bad news for certain armies like Aeldari perhaps. Finally, for the last Death Guard list, we've got this one by Derek Apshey of 40k Dirtbags. He used this to take first at AC Champions Cup, going 7-0 at an 100-player tournament. Again, this is Virulent Vectorium, so standard play company with sticky objectives and things, and this one led by Mortarian himself, who can certainly make some great use out of some of the stratagems. Maybe the single most tempting one being the one where a unit could charge him, deal a whole bunch of damage, but quite likely fall short of killing him, and then he could immediately siphon a whole bunch of their health and hit back. Besides him, we've got loads of stuff already talked about, heavy blight launcher drones, 2 sets of Death Shroud Terminators led by Lords of Contagion with the melee damage enhancement, a Demon Prince of Nurgle with Revolting Regeneration, a Tallyman for farming up some command points, 2 Plague Marine units in a Rhino, I guess with a Foul Blight Spawn attached, some Spawn and Poxwalkers, and then what looks like Typhus going solo as a cheapish deep strike character that's still a pain to take down and can absolutely justify himself with his own melee stats and mortal wound attacks. Overall, a bit of a different take to take Mortarion. It's certainly a massive and scary centerpiece model with a bunch of damage, and it's got some very nice reactive abilities too. In any case, I hope you've enjoyed a quick roundup of some of the scariest lists in Warhammer 40k right now. Let me know your thoughts on the armies or any other insights or corrections. I'll look forward to hearing your takes down in the comments below. Before I go, I'll just give a quick shout out to Titans Terrain, the video sponsor, and just talk through a few pros, cons, and specific offerings for their folding cardboard terrain. As I talked about earlier in the video, I do feel like it's one of the terrain sets that's got more obvious advantages and disadvantages compared with some. The biggest selling point being that it's really easy to store and transport due to the whole folding and pop-up style thing, going in the same size box as a normal size board game. They're far cheaper than a whole board of Games Workshop terrain, though you could say that of plenty of other offerings. It's kind of similar sort of price to MDF, and of course it doesn't need any painting or assembly, it's ready to go immediately. The folding cardboard design does come with some compromises though. It does mean it's a bit less sturdy and hard wearing versus plastic or MDF, given it is made of cardboard, designed to fold flat, so it maybe needs a bit more caretaking with it. The grid layout can mean a bit less flexibility than some terrain sets as well. In 10th edition 40k it can make some firing lanes, and I'll probably use just a tiny bit of extra terrain with an extra ruin wall or two on top of it, just to break up a firing lane or two. It doesn't really make tournament-approved layouts if that's what you're looking for, though I think it's a usable enough set for casual games. In any case, for their main offerings, they've got 3 different ones. A Forgotten Furnace set, which is sort of like a Chaos Foundry with a bunch of glowing ruins and factories. A Shattered Hive in maybe a more standard bombed out ruined city with armoured containers and shells of buildings. And then some more verdant ruins in an overgrown capital, lots of grass and some ruins that could be usable enough for both fantasy or grimdark settings. Each of those also has an expansion centerpiece set, both a cathedral square type thing for 2 of them and an infernal spire for the foundry. Check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like to take a look over their stuff, and in any case a massive thank you to them for sponsoring this one. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you'd like to support the channel, I'll just mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good or you'd just like to support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.